Good afternoon, Carl. Well, now we come to the conclusion of the story. In the last portion, you heard about how Mowgli freed his adopted mother and father from the village and from evil Buldeo who was going to hurt them. Now you hear how Mowgli brings justice to the village. The mob was standing outside the door of the hut. Here was some little difficulty with the catch of the door. It had been very firmly fastened, but the crowd tore it away boldly, and the light of the torches streamed into the room, where, stretched full length on the bed, his paws crossed and lightly hung down over one head, black as the pit and terrible as a demon, was Bagheera. There was only a half-minute of desperate silence, as the front ranks of the crowd clawed and tore their way back from the threshold, and in that minute Bagheera raised his head and yawned, elaborately, carefully, ostentatiously, as he would yawn when he wished to insult an equal. The fringed lips drew back and up, the red tongue curled, the lower jaw dropped and dropped till you could see halfway down the hot gullet, and the gigantic dog teeth stood clear to the pit of the gums till they rang together, upper and under, with the snick of steel-faced wards shooting home round the edges of the safe. Next instant the street was empty. Bagheera leaped back through the window and stood at Mowgli's side, while a yelling, screaming torrent scrambled and tumbled over one another in their panic haste to get to their own huts. "They will not stir till day comes," said Bagheera quietly. "And now?" The silence of the afternoon sleep seemed to overtake the village, but as they listened, they could hear the sound of heavy grain boxes being dragged over earthen floors and sat down against doors. Bagheera was quite right. The village will not stir till daylight. Mowgli sat still and thought, and his face grew darker and darker. "What have I done?" said Bagheera, coming last to his feet, fawning. "Nothing but great good. Watch them now till the day. I sleep." Mowgli ran off to the jungle and dropped like a dead man across a rock, and slept the day round, and the night began again. When he waked, Bagheera was at his side, and there was a newly killed buck at his feet. Bagheera watched curiously while Mowgli went to work with his skinning knife, ate and drank, and turned over with in his hands. "The man and the woman are come safe with an Aisha of Kaniwara. Thy lair mother sent the word back by Chill the Kite. They found a horse before midnight of the night they were freed, and went very quickly. Is that not well?" "That is well," said Mowgli. "And thy man pack in the village did not stir till the sun was high this morning. Then they ate their food and went back quietly to the houses. Did they by chance see thee?" "It may have been. I was rolling in the dust before the gate at dawn, and I may have also made some small song to myself. Now, little brother, there is nothing more to do. Come hunting with me in Baloo. He has new hives and wishes to show, and we all desire to see thee back as of old. Take off that look which makes even me afraid. The man and the woman will not be put into the red flower, and all that goes well in the jungle. Is it not true? Let us forget the man pack. They shall be forgotten in a little while. Where does Hathi feed tonight?" "Where he chooses. Who can answer the silent one? But why? What is that Hathi can do that we cannot? Bid him and his 3 sons come to me." "But, indeed, and true, little brother, it is not seemly to say come and go to Hathi. Remember, he is the master of the jungle, and before the man cat changed the look on thy face, he taught thee all the master words of the jungle. That is all one. I have a master word for him now. Bid him come to Mowgli the Frog, and if he does not hear it first, bid him come because of the sack of the fields of Burtapore." "The sack of the fields of Burtapore," Bagheera repeated 2 or 3 times to make sure. "I go. Hathi can be angry, but angry at the worst, and I will give a moon's hunting to hear a master word that compels the silent one." He went away, leaving Mowgli stabbing furiously with his skinning knife into the earth. Mowgli had never seen human blood in his life till he had seen, and, what it meant more to him, smelled Messua's blood on the thongs that bound her. And Messua had been kind to him, and so far as he knew anything about love, he loved Messua as completely as he hated the rest of mankind. But, as deeply as he loathed them, their talk, their cruelty, and their cowardice, not for anything the jungle had to offer could he bring himself to take a human life, and have that terrible scent of blood back in his nostrils. His plan was simpler and more thorough, and he laughed to himself when he thought that he was one of old Buldeo's tales told under the peepul tree that evening that had put the idea into his head. "It was a master word," Bagheera whispered into his ear. "They were feeding by the river, and they obeyed as though they were bullocks. Look where they come now." Hathi and his 3 sons arrived, in their usual way, without a sound. And this car may be strange, but an Indian elephant can move as though he was floating, as though you can't hear a thing, if he so chooses. The mud of the river was still fresh on their flanks, and Hathi was thoughtfully chewing the green stem of a young plantain tree that he had gouged up with his tusks. But every line on his vast body showed to Bagheera, who could see things when he came across them, that it was not the master of the jungle speaking to a man cub, but one who is afraid of coming before one who is not. His three sons rode side by side behind their father. Mowgli half lifted his head as Hathi gave him good hunting. He kept him swinging and rocking and shifting from one foot to another for a long time before he spoke, and when he opened his mouth it was to Bagheera, not to the elephants. "I will tell a tale that was told me by the hunter ye hunted today," said Mowgli. "It concerns an elephant, old and wise, who fell into a trap, and the sharpened stake of the pit scarred him a little above his heel to the crest of his shoulder, leaving a white mark." Mowgli threw out his hand, as Hathi wheeled the moonlight showed a good long white scar on his slaty side, as though he had been struck with a red-hot whip. "Men came to take him from the trap," Mowgli continued, "but he broke his ropes, for he was strong, and went away till his wound was healed. Then he came, angry, by night to the fields of those hunters, and I remember now that he had three sons. These happened many, many rains ago, and very far away, among the fields of Butpore. What came to those fields at the next reaping, Hathi? They were reaped by me and my sons," said Hathi. "And to the ploughing that follows the reaping? There was no ploughing." "And to the men that live by the green crops in the ground," said Mowgli. "They went away." "And to the huts where the men slept," said Mowgli. "We tore the roofs to pieces, and the jungle swallowed up the walls." "And what more? And as much good ground as I can walk over in 2 nights from the east to the west, and from the north to the south, as much as I can walk over in 3 nights, the jungle took. We let in the jungle upon 5 villages, and in those villages and in their lands, the grazing ground, the soft crop grounds, there's not one man today who takes his food from the ground. That was the sack of the fields of Butpore, and which I and my 3 sons did. And now I ask, man cub, how did the news of it come to thee?" "A man told me, and now I see even Buldeo can speak truth. It was well done, Hathi with the white mark, but the second time it shall be done better. For the reason is that there is a man to direct. Thou knowest the village of the Man Pack has cast me out. They are idle, senseless, and cruel. They play with their mouths, and they do not kill the weaker for food, but for sport. When they are full-fed, they would throw their own breed into the red flour. This I have seen. It is not well that they should live any more. I hate them." "Kill, then," said the youngest of Hathi's 3 sons, picking up a tuft of grass and dusting against his forelegs and throwing it away, while his little red eyes glanced furtively from side to side. "What good are white bones to me?" Mowgli answered angrily. "Am I the cub of a wolf to play in the sun with a raw head? I have killed Shere Khan, and his hide rots on Council Rock. But I do not know whither Shere Khan has gone, and my stomach is still empty. Now I will take that which I can see and touch. Let the jungle come upon that village, Hathi." Bagheera shivered and cowered down. He could understand, if the worst came to the worst, a quick rush down into the village street and a right and a left blow into the crowd, or a crafty killing of men as they ploughed the fields in twilight. But this scheme for deliberately blotting out an entire village from the eyes of man and beast frightened him. Now he saw why Mowgli had sent for Hathi. None but the long-lived elephant could plan and carry through such a war. "Let them run as the men ran from the fields of Butpore, till we have the rain-water for the only plough, and the noise of the rain on the thick leaves for the pattering of their spindles, till Bagheera and I lay in the house of the Brahmin, and the buck drink at the tank behind the temple. Let in the jungle, Hathi. But we have no quarrel with them, and it needs the red rage of great pain ere we tear down the places where men slept. Are ye the only eaters of grass in the jungle? Drive in your peoples. Let the deer and the pig and the negrine look to it. Ye need never show a hand's breadth till the fields are naked. Let in the jungle, Hathi. There will be no killing. My tusks were red at the sack of the fields of Butpore, and I would not wake that smell again. Nor I. I do not wish even their bones to lie on the clean earth. Let them go and find a fresh lair. They cannot stay here. I have seen and smelled the blood of the woman that gave me food, the woman whom they would have killed but for me. Only the smell of the new grass on their doorsteps can take away that smell. It burns my mouth. Let in the jungle, Hathi." "Ah," said Hathi, "so did the scar of the stake burn my hide till we watched the villagers die under the spring growth. Now I see. Thy war shall be our war. We will let in the jungle." Mowgli had hardly time to catch his breath. He was shaking all over with rage and hate before the place which the elephant stood was empty, and Bagheera was looking at him with terror. "By the broken lock that freed me," said the Black Panther at last. "Art thou the naked thing I spoke for in the pack when all was young? Master of the jungle, when my strength goes, speak for me, speak for Baloo, speak for us all. We are cubs before thee. Snap twigs under thy foot, fawns that have lost their doe. The idea of Bagheera being a stray fawn upset Mowgli altogether, and he laughed and caught his breath and sobbed and laughed again till he had to jump into a pool to make himself stop. Then he swam round and round, ducking in out of the bars in the moonlight, like the frog, his namesake. I'm just going to pause the tale just to explain something, Carl. This is a lesson that sometimes you have to learn earlier. Losing hurts, but sometimes winning can hurt more. And though what Mowgli is doing is just, and the men deserve it, to take vengeance, even just vengeance, can make you sick. So that is why every teacher throughout history has preached mercy. But the villagers have brought this on themselves. By this time, Hathi and his 3 sons had turned, each to one point of the compass, and were striding down the valleys a mile away. They went on and on for 2 days' march, that is to say, long 60 miles, through the jungle, and at every step and every wave of their trunks was known and noted and talked of by Mang and Chil, and the monkey people, and all the birds. Then they began to feed, and fed quietly for a week or so. Hathi and his sons are like Kaa, the rock python. They never hurry till they have to. At the end of that time, and none knew who had started it, a rumor went through the jungle that there was better food and water to be found in such and such a valley. The pig, who of course will go to the ends of the earth for a full meal, moved with the small wild foxes that live on the dead and dying of the herds, and the heavy-shouldered Neeglai moved parallel with the deer, and the wild buffaloes of the swamp came after the Neeglai. Then the least little thing would have turned the scattered, straggling droves that grazed and sauntered and drank and grazed again. But whenever there was an alarm, someone would rise up and soothe them. At one time would be Iki, the porcupine, full of news of good feet just a little further on. At another, Mang would cry cheerily and flap down a glade to show it was all empty. Or Baloo, with his mouth full of roots, would shamble along a wavering line, and half frightened, half romp, get clumsily back to the proper road. Very many creatures broke back, or ran away, or lost interest, but very many were left to go forward. At the end of another 10 days or so, the situation was his. The deer and the pig and the Neeglai were milling around and round in a circle 8 or 10 miles radius, while the eaters of the flesh skirmished round its edges. And at the center of that circle was the village, and round the village the crops were ripening, and on the crops sat men on what they call machans, that's platforms like pigeon perches, made of sticks at the top of 4 poles, to scare away birds and other stealers. Then the deer were coaxed no more. The eaters of flesh were close behind them, and forced them to go forward and inward. It was a dark night when Hathi and his 3 sons slipped down from the jungle and broke the poles of the machans with their tusks. They snapped stalk of hemlock and bloom falls, and the men that tumbled from them heard the deep gurgling of the elephants in their ears. Then the vanguard of the bewildered armies of the deer broke down and flooded into the village, grazing grounds and ploughed fields, and the sharp-hoofed rooting wild pig came with them. And what the deer left the pigs spoiled, and from time to time an alarm of wolves would shake the herds, and they would rush to and fro desperately, treading down the young barley, and cutting flat the banks of the irrigating channels. Before the dawn broke, the pressure on the outside of the circle gave way at one point. The eaters of flesh had fallen back and left an open path to the south, and drove upon drove of buck fled along it. Others, who were bolder, lay up in the thickets to finish their meal next night. But the work was practically done. When the villagers looked in the morning, they saw their crops were lost. And that meant death if they did not get away, for they lived in year and year out, yet as near to starvation as the jungle was near to them. When the buffaloes were sent to graze, the hungry brutes found the deer had cleared the grazing grounds, and so wandered into the jungle and drifted off with their wild mates. And when twilight fell, the 3 or 4 ponies that belonged to the village lay in their stables with their heads beaten in. Only Bagheera could have given those strokes, and only Bagheera would have thought of instantly dragging the last carcasses to the open street. The villagers had no heart to make fires in the fields that night, and so Hathi and his 3 sons were gleaning what was left, and where Hathi gleans, there is no need to follow. The men decided to live on their stored seed corn until the rains had fallen, and then take work as servants till they could catch up with the lost year. But as the grain dealer was thinking of his well-filled crates of corn and the prices he would level at the sale of it, Hathi's sharp tusks were picking out the corner of his mud house and smashing open the big wicker chest, leaped with cow dung where the precious stuff lay. When that last lost was discovered, it was the Brahmin's turn to speak. He had prayed to his own gods without answer. It might be, he said, that unconsciously the village had offended some one of the gods of the jungle, for beyond doubt the jungle was against them. Then he sent for the headmen of the nearest tribe of wandering Gonds, little wise and very black hunters living in the jungle, whose fathers came of the oldest race in India, the aboriginal owners of the land. And here, I just need to touch on that. The aboriginals are the very first people who ever lived in a land. In this case, in southern Africa, they are the San people. Here in India, they are the people of the south. They made the Gond welcome with what they had, and he stood on one leg with his bow in his hand, and 2 or 3 poison arrows stuck through his topknot, looking half afraid and half contemptuously at the anxious village in their ruined fields. They wished to know whether his gods, the old gods, were angry with them, and what sacrifices should be offered. The Gond said nothing, but tricked up a tale of the Karela, the vine that bears the bitter wild gourd and laced it to and fro across the temple door in the face of the staring red Hindu image. Then he pushed with his hand in the old mare along the road to Kaniwara and went back to his jungle and watched the jungle people drifting through it. He knew when the jungle moves, only white men can hope to turn it aside. There was no need to ask his meaning. The wild gourd would grow where they had worshipped their god, and the sooner they had saved themselves, the better. But it is hard to tear a village from its moorings. They stayed on as long as any summer food was left them, and they tried to gather nuts in the jungle, but shadows with glaring eyes watched them, and rolled before them even at midday, and when they ran back afraid to their walls on the tree trunks they had passed not 5 minutes before, the bark would be stripped and chiseled with the stroke of some great taloned paw. The more they kept to their village, the broader grew the wild things that gambled and bellowed on the grazing grounds by the Wangunga. They had no time to patch and plaster the rear walls of empty bars that backed on the jungle. The wild pig trampled them down, and the knotty-rooted vines hurried after and through the elbows of a new-worn ground, and the coarse grass bristled behind the vines, like the lances of a goblin army following a retreat. The unmarried men ran away first, and carried the news as far and near that the village was doomed. Who could they fight, they said, against the jungle or the gods of the jungle, when the very village cobra had left his hole in the platform under the peepul tree? So their little commerce with the outside world shrunk as the trodden paths across the open grew freer and fainter. At last the nightly trumpeting of Hathi and his 3 sons ceased to trouble them, for they had no more to be robbed of. The crop on the ground and the seed in the ground had been taken. The outlying fields were already losing their shape, and it was time to throw themselves on the charity of the English at Kaniwara. Native fashion, they delayed their departure from one day to another, till the first rains caught them and the unmended roofs let in a flood, and the grazing ground stood ankle deep, and all life came on with a rush after the heat of the summer, and they waded out, men, women, and children, through the bleeding hot rain of morning, but turned naturally for one farewell look at their homes. They heard, as the last burdened family filed through the grate, the crash of falling beams and thatch behind the walls. They saw a shiny, snaky black trunk lifted for an instant and slatting a sodden hatch. It disappeared, and there was another crash, and following behind a squeal, Hathi had been plucking off the roofs of the huts as you pluck water lilies, and a rebounding beam had pricked him. He needed only this to unchain his full strength, for of all things in the jungle, the wild elephant enraged is the most wantonly destructive. He kicked backward at a mud wall, crumbling at the stroke, and crumbling, melted to yellow mud under the torrent of rain. Then he wheeled and squealed and tore through the narrow streets, leaning against the mud huts, right and left, shivering the crazy doors, and crumpling up the caves, while his 3 sons raged behind as they had raged at the sack of the fields of Budpore. The jungle will swallow these shells, said a quiet voice in the wreckage. It's the outer wall that must lie down, said Mowgli, with the rain sluicing over his bare shoulders and arms, and leaped back from a wall that was settling like a tired buffalo. All in good time, panted Hathi. Oh, but my tusks were red at Budpore. To the outer wall, children. With the head, together, now. The 4 pushed side by side. The outer wall bulged, split, and fell, and the villagers, dumb with horror, saw the savage clay-streaked heads of the wreckers of the ragged gap. Then they fled, houseless and foodless, down the valley as their village, shredded and tossed and trampled, melted around them. A month later, the place was a dimpled mound, covered with soft, green young stock. By the end of the rains, there was the roaring jungle in full blast on the spot that had been under the plough not 6 months before. And then we come to the end of the tale of how Mowgli let the jungle in on the village in retaliation for what they did to him and tried to do to his adoptive mother and father. And that is a great story, because the jungle is very strong, and you who live in Singapore probably don't know this, but When you go on a boat, 45 minutes, you see the jungle pressing around. It's only the skill and the mind of the men and women of Singapore that keeps that jungle away. I will end with Mowgli's song against people. I will let loose against you the fleet-footed vines. I will call in the jungle to stamp out your lives. The roofs shall fade before it, the housebeam shall form, and Karela, the bitter Karela, shall cover it all. In the gates of these your councils my people shall sing, in the doors of these your gardens the batfolk shall cling, and the snake shall be your watchman by a hot sun unswept, for the Karela, the bitter Karela, shall fruit wherever ye slept. And ye shall sometimes see my strikers, ye shall hear them and guess. By night before moonrise I will send for my cess, and the wolf shall be your herdsman, by a landmark removed, for the Karela, the bitter Karela, shall seed where ye have loved. I'll reap your fields before you at the hands of a host. Ye shall glean behind my reapers for the bread that is lost. And the deer shall be your oxen by a headland untilled. For the Karela, the bitter Karela, shall leaf where ye build. I have untied against you the club-footed vines I set in the jungle to stamp out the lines. The trees are on you. The house beams shall fall. And the Karela, the bitter Karela, shall cover you all. And now we come to the end of the story. I will see you again tomorrow for further stories of Mowgli in the jungle, now that this dark chapter is closed, and perhaps these will be happier ones. Love you to pieces, Carl.